It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast presented by fantasypoints.com. Please check it out. It's awesome. When you sign up, and you will, use the code FEAST so they know I sent you. It's the show that's so nice. We do it twice. It's the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast. We do the Thursday nighter and all the Sunday 1 o'clock games in the first episode, which posts midday on Wednesday. Then we record another episode that posts shortly after midnight on Thursday to make sure your podcast apps don't freak out and you get two easily digestible shows. And when I say we, I mean me, Ross Tucker, at Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker Pod, and he, Joe Dolan, him, whatever I'm supposed to say, at FG_Dolan. He is the czar of everything he oversees at fantasypoints.com using the code FEAST. And Joe, we shall go in and start the New York Jets and the Seattle Seahawks. I am oddly intrigued by this one from a fantasy perspective.
Oh, Greg Williams, you legend. Greg Williams is now like, does Greg Williams ever have to buy a drink in East Rutherford, New Jersey again? I mean, I had Jets fans texting me. My friend, large Jets fan, that's literally what he calls himself. And believe me, it is the most accurate nickname of all time. He's texting me, and then he is apoplectic. He's like, what are we doing? What are we doing? Because at the same time, the Jaguars were in the process of blowing the game to the Vikings, and he's like, no. And then I look up, and I'm watching my TV, and I see my Twitter go absolutely bonkers with what happened with that touchdown to Henry Ruggs. And look, I mean, it was one of the dumbest defensive calls I have ever seen in my entire life. It was hilarious, and Jet fans are so happy it happened because they don't care. The embarrassment of 0-16 will not last if they land their franchise quarterback. Of course, I'm now talking about the future, and we want to talk about the present with the New York Jets. And here's where we got to start. We got to start in the backfield. Frank Gore tested for a concussion. He left that game last week. Ty Johnson goes for 100 yards in the backfield. So if Frank Gore can't play, Ty Johnson is a viable flex option. But keep in mind, the Jets are 2 touchdown underdogs in Seattle here. So they're not going to be able to run the ball a whole lot. Jamison Crowder's back from the dead. He scored 2 touchdowns with Sam Darnold at quarterback. Denzel Mims has a personal issue. I just hope everything is okay with him and his family, which I guess would mean Brashad Perriman and Jamison Crowder, if Denzel Mims indeed can't play this week, are going to be the top receivers for the Jets. Crowder's a wide receiver 3. I'd prefer to stay away from Perriman. Obviously, Darnold's not an option, and you will look at and see what's going on in the backfield here. But this is one of those bad fantasy teams we talked on the last podcast too. If you're playing somebody here, you're hoping for like 10 points in a PPR, and then you hit the road and say, thanks for your service. It really, if I want to boil it down to the simplest terms, it's Jamison Crowder or bust for me right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. What about Seattle, though?
So Seattle, I'm sorry, Russell Wilson, you don't get to play against Greg Williams' defense. Unfortunately for Russ, he still gets to play against a poor Jets defense that, time and time again, though, they have proven that they are stout against the run and abominable against the pass. The question is, does Pete Carroll come out and say, I don't care, we're going to pound Chris Carson into the line of scrimmage 15 times? To me, look, Chris Carson had 13 carries last week in that terrible game against the Giants. Russell Wilson had 43 dropbacks. Pete Carroll, you can say whatever you want. Oh, they need to let Russ cook. Blah, 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 blah. You still have to pay attention to what the coach does. Pete Carroll does not want Russell Wilson dropping back 50 times and Chris Carson getting 13 carries. That's not the way he wants to play. That being said, Russell Wilson's numbers have been poor the last number of weeks, perhaps coinciding with Tyler Lockett being a little bit dinged up. This is a bounce back spot for Russell Wilson. Every single team, including Anthony Lynn, somebody else who would love to probably pound the rock 40 times a game. Every team has decided that throwing the ball against the New York Jets is the best strategy. The Bucks, the Chiefs, the Patriots, the Chiefs have decided to do that. The Raiders have decided to do that. The Patriots have decided to do that. The Chargers have decided. Every team has decided that throwing the ball against the Jets is the best way to attack them. I can't imagine Russell Wilson doesn't put up huge numbers. I can't imagine DK Metcalf doesn't put up huge numbers in this game. I can't imagine Tyler Lockett doesn't have a good game. I'm starting my Seahawks pass catchers across the board. And Chris Carson, he is an RB1 this week because I still think he's going to get in the end zone. I think this is a good game for him to score a touchdown. But I think this is a massive, massive bounce back spot for the Seattle Seahawks passing game.
Wow, interesting. Okay. What about the Colts and the Raiders, Joe?
Well, Phillip Rivers is still dinged up. He isn't practicing. We're recording this on a Wednesday. He isn't practicing. But every indication is he's going to play. He's dealing with that toe injury, and he played really well against Houston. I think he's a viable streamer this week. He's got a couple of good matchups, actually, the next 2 weeks. If you're looking for a streaming quarterback for your playoffs, maybe you were rolling with Carson Wentz in a deeper league. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. But Phillip Rivers has matchups with the Raiders and then the Texans again next week. So 2 good matchups in a row for Phillip Rivers if you want to go after him. How about T.Y. Hilton back from the dead? 2 good games in a row after doing nothing for the first 11 weeks of the season. He's a wide receiver 3, still a little skeptical there. Michael Pittman is a wide receiver 3 in this matchup against the Raiders. And finally, Jonathan Taylor has busted out. Like he and Cam Akers on very similar kind of paths this year. He has busted out. I think he has finally earned the right to be the Colts' number 1 running back. Colts fans were freaking out, by the way, because I think Taylor had like 3 carries for 20 yards in the early going in that game last week against Houston, and then they just went away from him. And then finally in the second half, they gave him carries. He ends up with 13 for 91. He scores the 38-yard receiving touchdown. He is an RB2. Nyheim Hines is a low-end RB2. It's a good spot for this Colt offense, which really was efficient last week against the Houston Texans.
Okay, what about the Raiders against the Colts D?
Yeah, Darren Waller, he's pretty good, huh? Pretty much the only guy I feel good about on the Raiders right now is Darren Waller. I think Derek Carr could be under siege in this matchup. And you saw last week against Houston how important is DeForest Buckner to that defense for Indianapolis. And the Raider run game hasn't been good all year. They just haven't run the ball well. They haven't blocked it well. Devontae Booker was a massive fantasy disappointment last week with just 6.1 points in a PPR, even with Josh Jacobs out. Keep an eye on the status of Josh Jacobs, but even if he plays, he's an RB2 against the Colts and DeForest Buckner and that defense. He is so important to what they do on that defensive side of the football. And if you're playing a wide receiver here, the one thing I will say, Nelson Aguilar, that to like Eagle fans, 4 catches for 38 yards on 11 targets is a very, very Nelson Aguilar line. I will say this, though. Derek Carr overthrew him quite a bit at the end of that game. And barring a normal defensive call against the Jets, the Raiders would have lost that game, and Derek Carr would have himself to blame. He would be able to say, look, I overthrew Nelson Aguilar a couple of times on potential touchdowns. He is somebody I think you could still fire up as a wide receiver 3, but really the only guy I feel good about for the Raiders, and I'm not breaking any news here, is Darren Waller, who had 200 receiving yards last week.
Washington and San Francisco, it doesn't sound good about Antonio Gibson's toe, Joe. Just now starting to get excited about Washington.
Yeah, and look, here's the thing with Washington. Who's going to run the football for them? I mean, we've talked about J.D. McKissick a lot on this podcast this year. He's not a runner. You know, he had 5 carries for 8 yards in that game last week against Pittsburgh. And I know it's a tough defense, but I mean, he had 5 carries for 8 yards. He is just not somebody who's going to make too many plays as a runner. He's a receiver, but I think he's going to get a lot of work in both regards because Peyton Barber is not very good. I mean, Peyton Barber, if Antonio Gibson doesn't go, he is like an RB2 on the low end. If you're playing him, he's averaged 2.7 yards per carry this year, and you hope he gets in the end zone. So that Washington run game takes a huge hit. Really disappointed in the line for Terry McLaurin, just 2 of 14 on 6 targets. I think you look at that and you say, hey, I mean, you move on to next week and see what happens. And also, Logan Thomas has been a guy who's been really tickling Alex Smith's fancy right now. He caught all 9 of his targets for 98 yards. He's on the tight end 1 radar. But really, the loss of Antonio Gibson is going to make Washington a one-dimensional football team. Alex Smith is going to have to drop back quite a bit. They're going to have to use Thomas and McKissick in the passing game as surrogates for their run game. I don't know if there's very few teams have a bigger drop-off between their RB1 and their RB2 in the way Antonio Gibson to Peyton Barber is, because we know McKissick's role is separate of that, but Antonio Gibson to Peyton Barber is just an apocalyptic downgrade for the Washington football team.
What about the Niners, Joe?
They're one of those teams where you understand how smart Kyle Shanahan is, and still you sit there and you question, like, what are you doing? Why is Jeff Wilson leading your backfield in snaps? Why is Tevin Coleman getting carries? He had 2 carries for negative 11 yards. Why is Jerick McKinnon not getting the football? And all of a sudden, why is Raheem Mostert not getting the football? He's been producing ever since he's been in the lineup. I don't know. It's bad. Their fantasy production really right now is the wide receiver. It's Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. Those are the guys I feel good about. Deebo Samuel, why didn't he get involved until the second half last week? It's just a bizarre situation for San Francisco. I think Raheem Mostert's a running back 2. I think you fire up Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel as wide receiver 2s. I think they're both good enough to look at in that regard. And then maybe you take a shot on Jordan Reed, who scored a touchdown. But man, just a really, really disappointing performance for San Francisco. And sometimes I think Kyle Shanahan gets in his own way using all these different players.
New Orleans is at Philadelphia. We'll start with the Eagles. Jalen Hurts is their starting quarterback. I know you've tweeted about it a lot, Joe. You are a fan of the team. Let's just talk fantasy here. What does it mean for any Eagles? Is there Jalen Hurts? Is there a place for him somewhere? Probably not against that Saints D.
I'm going to borrow a tweet from somebody who's prominent on Philly Twitter, and I want to point this out. I am very much not a fan of the Philadelphia Eagles. I hate them more than anything. I just really want them to win. That's the way a lot of people feel about the Philadelphia Eagles right now. I think that's my boy Dr. Pizza MD. So yeah, I think that's one of his. But yeah, it's rough going in Philadelphia right now. Ross, I actually think Jalen Hurts is a viable streamer because he's going to run. And I think the worst potential outcome for the Eagles right now is Jalen Hurts just makes a couple plays by running around and extending the play. And because the structure is awful. We've talked about it all year. Carson Wentz is seeing ghosts. Nobody's trying to say Carson Wentz is playing well. He's seeing ghosts. He's under pressure constantly. And even when he's not under pressure, he thinks he is, which is part of the huge problem with him. But the worst thing that could happen is Jalen Hurts has to play in this garbage offense, makes a couple of plays by running around, and everybody thinks everything's fixed. That being said, if Jalen Hurts runs around, that's great news for fantasy, because we saw Taysom Hill. We saw it from Cam Newton. We've seen it from Cam Newton's thrown for under 100 yards in 2 consecutive games, but if he gets in the end zone as a runner, it helps you for fantasy. We saw from Taysom Hill 2 weeks ago. Throws for under 100 yards against Denver, scores 2 rushing touchdowns, gets it done for fantasy. So even in this tough matchup, and it is a brutal matchup for Jalen Hurts against the number 1 defense in the NFL, playing better than anybody right now, he can run around, make some plays, probably is going to execute within better timing than Wentz right now because he's just not seeing the ghost that Carson Wentz is seeing. But when it comes to the Eagles, I want nothing to do with their wide receivers. They still don't know how to play them. They're playing Alshon Jeffrey over Travis Fulgham, which I guess Doug Peterson said this week might not happen. It's stupid. Jalen Reagor didn't do enough as a receiver, just 1 target. He caught it, but he's not in your lineup right now. The guy who I think I trust as a receiver in my lineup is Dallas Goedert, the tight end. He's a freak of nature. The Eagles need to lose Zach Ertz this offseason. And then Miles Sanders. Apparently Doug Peterson says, hey, we got to do a better job getting Miles Sanders football. You think? You haven't done it all year. You haven't done it all year. So just a disaster. Miles Sanders is an RB2. I think Jalen Hurts will give them a spark. I just don't expect it to be pretty in this game, Ross.
I thought Taysom Hill looked pretty good against the Falcons this time, Joe.
Maybe, they came out with the comments against, by the way, that's 2 times against the Falcons that Taysom Hill's played really well. And then against Denver, Taysom Hill and Sean Payton both came out with the comments after the Denver game. Look, unique circumstance. We're going into a game where the team doesn't have a quarterback. Don't do anything to lose this football game. And Taysom Hill, again, threw for under 100 yards, and they won that game by 4 touchdowns. So Jim Schwartz's Eagles defense has struggled as long as I can remember against running quarterbacks. I would anticipate Taysom Hill's going to have a couple long runs in this game. Darius Slay, the top corner for the Eagles, is banged up. So that's good news for Michael Thomas, who's had 2 really good games with Taysom Hill at quarterback. Alvin Kamara is an RB1. Latavius Murray is a flex option. And you're playing Taysom Hill. You're playing Michael Thomas. And I think Jared Cook as a low-end tight end option is on the radar. But I expect Taysom Hill, in the event Drew Brees doesn't play, and it doesn't look like he will, Taysom Hill will be putting up QB1 numbers this week against Philly.
Let's get to the Falcons and the Chargers. Dude, is something wrong with the Chargers offense, Joe?
I wonder if first and foremost, I think the easiest thing you could say is Justin Herbert is hitting a rookie slump. But then also you look at Bill Belichick's numbers against rookie quarterbacks, and that's kind of just what happened. And Justin Herbert had no help last week. They just completely lost the plot of that game early. To me, that was a throw the tape out kind of game. This is a rebound spot. You're playing the Atlanta Falcons defense that's been carved up the last couple of weeks out, including twice by Taysom Hill. This is a bounce back spot for Justin Herbert. Get him in your DFS lineups. He's a QB1 this week. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Hunter Henry, Austin Eckler, start them all. This is a bounce back spot for Justin Herbert. Great. I mean, I can't imagine being more thrilled to look at the other side of the football and seeing the Atlanta Falcons defense and the way, by the way, they've been good against the run, have the Falcons in general. They've had a couple of spots where they've gotten carved up, but in general, they've been better against the run than the pass. I can't imagine for Justin Herbert a better option to be looking across the field after struggling against the Patriots than the Atlanta Falcons defense. So it's a blow-up spot for the Chargers.
Interesting. All right. Well, what about the Falcons offensively? Ignore
the backfield. Ito Smith left with a concussion last week. Todd Gurley stinks. Brian Hill hasn't done anything. The only way I'm playing anybody is if Brian Hill is the starter because Gurley and Ito Smith can't play. Just ignore the backfield. Matt Ryan, it's like pulling teeth with this guy, but he managed to get it done for fantasy in a small way, throwing for 273 and a touchdown against that Saints defense. This Charger defense is not the Saints defense. Calvin Ridley goes for over 100 yards against the Saints. Julio Jones in his return, 6 for 94. Both of those guys are in your lineup. I'm benching Hayden Hurst at this spot. At this point, he's not 100%. Maybe Russell Gage as a wide receiver 3, but really it's Ryan, Ridley, and Jones, and I think that's where your Atlanta Falcon focus should be right now.
Packers and the Lions. It sounds like DeAndre Swift might be back for the Lions. He doesn't have the migraines anymore, Joe?
Yeah, I just think it's bizarre. I mean, these doctors know more than I do, but I think it's bizarre that they pulled him out of the concussion protocol, but he had migraines. I don't know how you separate the two. Somebody could probably tell me. I'm not really sure. Kenny Golladay is not practicing on Wednesday. That, to me, is not a good sign for his availability. He hasn't practiced in weeks. You would think they'd try to get him in at least limited sessions if he's going to be able to go. But as of right now, I am not expecting Kenny Golladay to play in this football game. If DeAndre Swift plays, he is a must start. He deserves the chance to really take that backfield over. Again, the GM's gone, the coach is gone. Evaluation mode sometimes is a little bit different when it's a lame duck staff, but DeAndre Swift was a breakout star before that mysterious concussion. You play Marvin Jones in this game, even though Jair Alexander, you might catch a shadow there. And TJ Hawkinson, who has quietly been one of the breakout fantasy stars of this year because he hasn't scored a bunch of touchdowns, but he's the number 3 tight end in overall scoring this year. He is in your lineup. And I think you can use Matthew Stafford as a low-end quarterback 1 in what could be a high-scoring game against the Green Bay Packers.
So Devontae Adams is unreal. Aaron Jones unreal. Aaron Rodgers unreal. What else do we need to know about the Packers?
Robert Tonyan is unreal. He's scored in 3 straight games. He can be in your lineup as a tight end 1. Marquez Valdez-Scantling dropped like a 70-yard bomb from Aaron Rodgers against the Eagles last week. So you wonder if Allen Lazard is now going to take over as the wide receiver 2, which would put him on the wide receiver 3 radar for fantasy. But you kind of nailed it, Ross. It's those 3 guys are definitely in your lineup, the 2 Aarons and Devontae Adams. And then I think you can consider Tonyan. Well, again, I don't know how many tight ends out there I'd start over Robert Tonyan, but it might just be on one hand that I'd count him right now. Aaron Rodgers trusts him in the red zone, and we know how important trust is for Aaron Rodgers as he continues his MVP campaign.
All right, the next game, Joe, is going to be our featured DraftKings game of the week. It's the Steelers.
Oh, this is going to be good.
And the Bills. They both played Monday. The Bills are actually favored by 2.5 points. It's crazy. I mean, the Steelers were just undefeated until two days ago, and now the Bills are favored over them. The Buffalo Bills by 2.5 points. The total is 46.5. All of these numbers, of course, courtesy of DraftKings. We had Josh Allen, who won a lot of DraftKings daily fantasy for people this week, going off against the San Francisco 49ers. We also have James Conner, who might be a sneaky play this week at DraftKings since he's off the COVID list.
Yeah, and that Buffalo run defense has been a problem this year. They do have Matt Milano, the linebacker, back, which is a big help. Pittsburgh, look what happened against Washington. I mean, the tight end got them across the middle, and the Bills don't really have a tight end that you can go to with any sort of consistency, but they do have Cole Beasley, and Cole Beasley's been a go-to guy for Josh Allen, and I really like him this week. Allen, look, you're downgrading Allen from last week, okay? He was exceptional against the 49ers. The Steelers are a different beast, but that Steeler defense has had some injuries. Bud Dupree being injured. You wonder if things are just starting to get to kind of unravel for Pittsburgh here at this point. For Buffalo, look, you understand Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, the running backs, they're flex options. They don't run the ball. They don't. I mean, it's just part of what they do. It is not a foundation of what they do. Beasley and Stephon Diggs absolutely must be in your lineups. I am not benching Josh Allen under any circumstances whatsoever. He is not getting benched from me. And look, Gabriel Davis, the rookie wide receiver out of UCF, he is maybe a decent DFS option if you're playing on a slate that includes this game as a cheaper option. He is their X of the future. I think he might be I think they might cut John Brown after this season and roll with him. But the Buffalo Bills are a narrow fantasy team. Allen, Diggs, Beasley, you love those 3 guys. Everybody else here, they're kind of in the flex conversation.
Okay, then you've got, for Pittsburgh, I don't know what's going on with these guys dropping all these passes. Roethlisberger says he needs to throw more catchable passes. It's hitting him in the hands.
Yeah, I know. That's good veteran quarterbacking. It's not catchable. It's a little wobbly. Deontay Johnson's dropped a ton of passes. He gets a lot of targets, though. I mean, what am I supposed to say? Deontay Johnson's catching 8 passes on 12 targets. All right, if he doesn't drop the ball, maybe he catches 9 passes, but that's good for fantasy. I'm still playing him. The guy who I would downgrade for Pittsburgh in this game is Chase Claypool, just because I have an inkling that he might be the guy if Buffalo chooses to selectively shadow with Trey White. I feel like Chase Claypool would be the guy. So he's a guy I'm downgrading. Deontay's a wide receiver too. Juju is a wide receiver, 7 catches for 28 yards last week, Juju. But he got 10 targets, so he's a wide receiver too. Eric Ebron has been a guy getting just a massive amount of targets the last number of weeks. He's somebody who's dropping the ball too, but you kind of have to put him in your lineup. And I think Ben, with the Steelers' complete and utter inability to run the football, there's a good bet he throws 40-plus passes in this game, whether James Conner plays, and he's expected to, or not. James Conner is an RB2. They really need him because they cannot run the ball at all. I can't remember the last time I saw a Steelers team, if ever, that was as incapable of running the football as this Steelers team is.
You don't think Conner makes a difference?
He does. I think he's an RB2. I mean, look, obviously you're not playing Benny Snell or Anthony McFarland if Connor can't go after that crap that they threw out there last week. He's an RB2, though, and I mean, they ran it well early in the season, but it's just been kind of like pulling teeth with Connor. The thing about with Connor is he does contribute in the passing game as well, which helps matters.
Last game, Joe. It is Monday night. It's a good one. The Baltimore Ravens, who I saw last night against the Cowboys, and the Cleveland Browns. What's gotten into Baker Mayfield and the Cleveland Browns?
Well, I wouldn't expect that to continue this week against Baltimore. Just to be fair, Baltimore absolutely victimized Baker Mayfield in Week 1. I know that's a lifetime ago, but you remember that game. Kevin Stefanski, the regalia, and Baker Mayfield goes 21 of 39 for 189. I think he threw a pick on his first pass in that game. It's not a good spot for Baker. I would not be playing him this week. Jarvis Landry, I think, is the receiver. If I'm playing a receiver here who I would consider, he's kind of like T.Y. Hilton, who we discussed on the last podcast. He's had 2 big games after doing absolutely nothing all season. I think you could consider him here, but ultimately, I think Cleveland's going to want to run the football. It's a downgrade across the board. Kareem Hunt hasn't done really much of anything the last number of weeks since Nick Chubb got back. So Chubb's an RB1, Hunt's a low-end RB2. Jarvis Landry's a wide receiver 3. But other than that, I don't know. Like, are you playing Donovan Peoples-Jones in your fantasy playoffs? No. I don't think so. So it's not a good fantasy spot for the Cleveland Browns, though. I mean, Kevin Stefanski is I mean, maybe he's the front runner for Coach of the Year right now. He should be he's obviously in the conversation. He's done a really good job, but it's just not a good spot for their offense.
What about the Ravens and what you saw Tuesday night, Joe? Gus Edwards lost weight and has some juice to him.
Yeah, and I wonder if they're finally like phasing out Mark Ingram, because no one else has some juice. J.K. Dobbins, and like, it's just frustrating to me because, like, look, I am not trying to insinuate that I know more than Greg Roman. Okay, I don't. However, it drives me nuts. Like, J.K. Dobbins, it seems like every single time, anecdotally, of course, but every single time this guy's touched football this year, it seems like it goes for 10 yards. And like, all right, get him out of there. Time to put Justice Hill in. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. It should be Dobbins and it should be Gus Edwards. In fantasy, we can deal with 2. We can deal with 2 guys in the backfield. When it becomes 3 or 4, like we were talking about with San Francisco, then that becomes a problem, okay? I don't want to deal with 3 or 4 guys in the backfield. Mark Ingram, thank you for your service. You've had a wonderful career. Maybe we can get you a ring this year, even though we've struggled. But goodbye. We need Gus Edwards and we need J.K. Dobbins to be the top 2 guys in Baltimore. Not that I trust Greg Roman to do that, but both of those guys, Dobbins I consider more of an RB2. I think Edwards is a flex. Ingram is on your bench. Lamar Jackson, congratulations, Lamar. Ross, with his performance Monday night, he had 2 accomplishments. He tied Dak Prescott for number of top 5 quarterback finishes this year. Dak Prescott hasn't played since week 5. And he tied Gardner Minshew in number of top 12 quarterback appearances this year. Congratulations, Lamar Jackson. One of the biggest busts for fantasy football, but he played a fantastic game. And fresh off the COVID list, I thought the touchdown throw to Hollywood Brown was his best throw of the season. Kind of across the field, dropped into a bucket. It was finally good to see those 2 guys get on the same page. We'll see about the status of Mark Andrews, who's still on the COVID list as of today. Hollywood Brown with no Denzel Ward, he's a wide receiver 3. I'm not throwing all my support behind him just because he scored a touchdown in that game. I can't do that. But he's a wide receiver 3, and I want to check on the status of Mark Andrews. Lamar Jackson, if somehow you survived and got to this point with Lamar Jackson as your quarterback, I don't know what you would have seen on Tuesday night that would have changed your mind about starting him this week. It was arguably his most impressive game of the year.
Well, what changes my mind, Joe, is nothing. I need to go to fantasypoints.com like I do all the time. I've already put the code FEAST in. I am already a member, and I need to read stuff. But some of you should highly consider it. Fantasypoints.com, code FEAST. You got to get the content from Joe and Greg Cosell and Adam Kaplan and John Hansen and literally a cast of dozens. It's unbelievable how many people they've got, and it's very affordable, very affordable. So finish the fantasy season strong, or maybe you need some help for next year. Maybe you need to start getting started there. FantasyPoints.com, code FEAST. Check him out on Twitter at FG_Dolan. I'm at Ross Tucker, NFL everywhere. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. We're stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Feast podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and the College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.